The basement of Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor was a tomb of stale hope. By April 1942, the air hung thick with sweat, cigarette smoke, and the metallic scent of desperation. Commander Joseph Rochefort, a career cryptologist still wearing his red smoking jacket over a uniform, paced like a caged animal between rows of desks. His team, America's finest mathematical minds and linguists, were shattered. Before them lay the jagged mountain of JN-25, the Japanese Navy's primary operational cipher. It wasn't a code, it was a fortress. Each message was a string of 5-digit numbers, first pulled from a 33,000-group codebook, then further scrambled using additive tables changed with ruthless frequency. For 18 months, this cryptographic labyrinth had repelled every assault, mocking them with its elegant, brutal efficiency. The war news was a grim drumbeat of defeat. Wake Island fallen, Guam overrun, the Philippines collapsing. American submarines prowled blind, and the Imperial Navy struck with terrifying precision. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King's furious ultimatum echoed, "The Japanese are running circles around us. This cannot continue." Yet here, in this humid vault, the only answers were the maddening clicks of Amesbury IBM tabulators sorting through what seemed like pure encrypted chaos. Admiral Chester Nimitz needed to know where the enemy would strike next to save the Pacific, but the maps in Rochefort's room were just vast expanses of blue, dotted with question marks. Into this atmosphere of intellectual siege arrived a new officer, Ensign Andrew Gleason. He was not a seasoned veteran, but a fresh Yale graduate and award-winning mathematician, quietly commissioned into naval intelligence. To the weary, cynical analysts who'd fought JN-25 since 1940, he was another academic theorist, all polished degree and no practical instinct. They saw a young man out of his depth, another brain to throw uselessly at the problem. Commander Rochefort assigned him not to break through theory, but to the grim, grinding work of data analysis, sifting through mountains of intercepted traffic for any statistical anomaly. While the senior cryptanalysts, like the legendary Agnes Driscoll, focused on complex linguistic patterns and codebook recovery, Gleason began a meticulous, systematic examination of the cipher's architecture itself. He ignored the assumed impossibility and started mapping the noise, the message indicators, the routing data, the patterns others dismissed as procedural junk. In the early morning hours of May 1942, hunched over a spread of intercepts, Gleason's pencil stopped. He had found a tiny recurring flaw, not in the code's heart, but in its mundane mechanical signature. A structural weakness everyone had overlooked because they were too busy attacking the fortress walls. He approached a senior analyst, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer, with trembling notes. The twist? The key to saving the Pacific Fleet wasn't hidden in the complex code itself. It was lying in plain sight, in the boring administrative preamble of every message, waiting for a mind trained at Yale to see it not as text, but as a solvable equation. Ensign Andrew Gleason was an anomaly in the tense, utilitarian world of Station Hypo. While others had earned their stripes through years of naval service or the brutal practical education of prior code-breaking battles, Gleason carried the scent of ivy and chalk dust. A mathematical prodigy, he had graduated from Yale not just with honors, but with the prestigious Barge Prize for the top mathematics student. His mind was a scalpel, honed on abstract theorems and the elegant proofs of Hilbert's problems. The Navy, desperately scouring universities for analytical talent, had commissioned him directly, seeing a first-class tool for a seemingly impossible task. To the veterans, like Chief Cryptanalyst Agnes Driscoll, who had broken Japanese codes by hand for over a decade, the young ensign embodied a frustrating disconnect. They were fighting a war of attrition against an endless flow of enemy messages. He represented pure, untested theory. Commander Rochefort, a pragmatist, assigned him not to the frontline attack on JN-25's codebook, but to the analysis of traffic patterns and indicator systems, a critical but granular task often seen as scut work for newbies. Gleason, however, did not see a menial assignment. He saw a data set. Where seasoned analysts sought meaning in the encrypted code groups themselves, Gleason began meticulously cataloging the external architecture of the messages, their call signs, frequencies, times of origin, and the short, unencrypted numerical indicators that prefaced each cipher. This methodological shift was his Yale training in action. He approached the chaotic intercept logs not as a linguist or a soldier, but as a statistician confronting a flawed system. Night after night, he cross-referenced mountains of traffic, plotting the behavior of these message indicators on vast sheets of graph paper. He noticed something others, focused on the deeper cipher, had dismissed as irrelevant protocol: a lack of true randomness in the indicator sequences for certain communication links. It was a tiny statistical blip, a ghost in the machine of Japanese naval communications. His heart pounding with the thrill of discovery, he took his findings to Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer, Rochefort's most trusted deputy. He laid out his graphs and correlations, speaking in the precise language of probabilities and deviations. Dyer, an engineer by training and a problem solver exhausted by dead ends, listened intently. He saw past Gleason's academic demeanor to the cold, hard data. The twist, the breakthrough that would crack JN-25, began not with a stolen codebook or a linguistic epiphany, but with a Yale mathematician's obsessive charting of bureaucratic radio procedure, a task everyone else considered clerical work. Dyer's next words would change the course of the war. "I think you're on to something. Let's take this to Rochefort." The basement of the administration building was a temple of organized chaos, but Ensign Gleason's corner became an oasis of pure system. Surrounded by the frantic energy of linguists and veteran codebreakers chasing intuitive leaps, Gleason worked with the quiet, methodical precision of a laboratory scientist. His Yale-trained mind rejected guesswork. He saw the ocean of intercepted JN-25 traffic not as impenetrable messages, but as a vast, flawed machine that left statistical exhaust fumes. His focus remained on the encrypted message indicators, the short, supposedly random number groups that told receiving stations which additive table to use. While the senior team, led by the formidable Agnes Driscoll, fought the Herculean battle of reconstructing the main codebook, Gleason hypothesized that the indicator system itself, a secondary layer, might be the weaker link. With Lieutenant Commander Dyer's cautious approval, he embarked on a colossal cataloging project. Using primitive IBM punch card tabulators and endless sheets of graph paper, he began sorting thousands of messages not by content, but by these indicators, mapping their frequency and distribution across different dates and Japanese naval units. It was tedious, soul-crushing work that many dismissed as a scholarly diversion from the real fight. Yet night after night, patterns began to emerge from the noise, patterns that hinted at a non-random and therefore exploitable procedure in how the Japanese selected their additive starting points. The breakthrough came not with a shout, but with a whispered calculation. Gleason discovered that the Japanese operators, likely under battle pressure or due to procedural shortcuts, were not choosing additive tablebook indicators with perfect randomness. There were statistically significant repetitions and predictable sequences in certain communication channels, a tiny crack in the cryptographic armor. By isolating messages with these weak indicators, he could tentatively guess a slice of the additive number used. This wasn't breaking the codebook, it was peeling back the first layer of the onion, creating a small window of known text. One evening, with Dyer leaning over his shoulder, Gleason demonstrated his method. Using a suspect indicator from a recent message, he predicted a fragment of the additive, subtracted it from the ciphertext, and revealed a single probable code group. He then cross-referenced this group with the small list of already cracked JN25 words from traffic analysis. It matched. The room seemed to hush. The twist was profound. Gleason had not out-muscled the cipher with superior linguistics or stolen documents. He had out-thought its human implementation, using systematic analysis to turn a Japanese procedural shortcut into a catastrophic backdoor. The unbreakable additive system was suddenly, vulnerably transparent in spots. Dyer immediately grasped the implication. This method could generate the cribs, pieces of known plaintext, needed to attack the rest of the message and ultimately the main codebook itself. He took Gleason's notes and said, "The professor just gave us a key. Now we need to make copies before they change the lock."
Presenting his findings to the inner circle of Station Hypo was Gleason's true trial by fire. The atmosphere in Commander Rocheford's cramped, secure room was thick with skepticism. Gathered were the veteran cryptologic warriors, Agnes Driscoll, whose intuition had broken earlier Japanese codes, linguist Joseph Finnegan, and other analysts hardened by years of failure. To them, Ensign Gleason was the college boy, proposing an abstract statistical theory against a cipher that had defied all conventional attack. Rocheford, though a maverick himself, listened with a Gambier's calculating gaze. Gleason laid out his evidence not with dramatics, but with a clinical academic precision that risked alienating his audience. He showed his graphs of indicator frequency, his correlation tables, and the tentative additive recoveries they enabled. He explained how predictable operator behavior created a depth, multiple messages using the same additive segment, which could be leveraged. The initial reaction was cold. Driscoll pointed out the fragility of the approach. The Japanese could change their procedures at any moment, rendering his painstaking work obsolete. Others questioned the scale. Even if he was right, could this method produce intelligence fast enough to matter in a shooting war? The meeting teetered on the edge of dismissal, another dead-end idea from a theorist who didn't understand the operational realities of combat cryptography. The turning point came from an unlikely source, pressure from the Pacific itself. In early May 1942, radio intercepts revealed a massive surge in Japanese naval traffic. A major operation, codenamed AF by U.S. analysts, was being planned. Admiral Nimitz needed answers immediately. Rocheford, backed into a corner with traditional methods yielding too slowly, made a fateful decision. He gave Gleason's method a limited, high-stakes test. He assigned a small team, including Dyer and a reluctant Driscoll, to apply the indicator attack exclusively to the AF-related message clusters. The challenge was brutal. Prove this academic theory could produce actionable, real-time intelligence within days, not months. Working around the clock, the team used Gleason's systematic approach to strip additives from a handful of critical messages. The tension was palpable. Then, a code group emerged that correlated with a known location from earlier partial breaks. It was followed by another. Like archaeologists brushing sand from a tablet, they uncovered fragments, references to invasion force, carrier support, and crucially, a need for fresh water. Rocheford and Dyer cross-referenced this last clue with their knowledge of Pacific atolls. Only one major target at their suspected range, Midway Island, had a known problem with its freshwater condensers. The twist was definitive and historical. Gleason's systematic, theory-driven approach didn't just work in a vacuum, it provided the crucial, timely crib that allowed the veterans to make the deductive leap. The college boy's method had just identified the target of Japan's grand offensive. Rochefort looked at the exhausted ensign and gave a pert, career-changing nod. "All right, Professor, now we build your system into a weapon." Gleason's systematic method was no longer a theory. It was the foundation of a full-scale cryptographic assault. Commander Rochefort reorganized the workflow in the basement.
The veteran analysts, setting aside their initial skepticism, now operated as an assembly line of decryption, with Gleason's indicator analysis providing the crucial entry point. Teams worked in relentless shifts. The first group, using Gleason's statistical models and the newly confirmed cribs from the AF traffic, systematically stripped additive layers from the most recent intercepts. The second group, led by linguists like Finnegan and cryptanalysts like Dyer, attacked the exposed code groups, slowly expanding the fragmentary glossary of recovered JN25 vocabulary. The third group, including Agnes Driscoll, focused on reconstructing the structure of the additive tables themselves, turning Gleason's pinpoint breaches into mapped corridors. The atmosphere transformed from despair to furious, focused energy. IBM tabulators clattered constantly, cross-referencing thousands of number groups. Walls became plastered with charts tracking recovered additives and code meanings. It was a race against the Japanese Navy's next move and against their own communications security officers who might change the systems at any moment. Gleason, now at the heart of the storm, moved from desk to desk, a young officer troubleshooting his own mathematical framework under combat conditions. The Yale approach, methodical, systematic, and scalable, was being stress-tested by the brutal realities of war. The intelligence product was revolutionary. By late May 1942, the IYPO team wasn't just guessing, they were reading. Decrypted fragments coalesced into a terrifyingly clear picture. The entire Imperial Japanese 1st Carrier Striking Force, carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, was converging on Midway. They knew the planned date for the initial airstrike, June 4. They knew the composition of the invasion force steaming from Saipan. They even intercepted queries about Midway's freshwater capacity, confirming Rochefort's brilliant deduction. This wasn't just signals intelligence, it was a live teletype of enemy intentions. When Rochefort presented this mosaic to Admiral Nimitz at Pacific Fleet Headquarters, the impact was seismic. Nimitz, a master strategist, now had the rarest of gifts in war: certainty. He could position his outnumbered carriers, the Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to an ambush. The entire American counter-strategy at Midway was built upon the foundation of broken JN25 traffic. The twist was of historic magnitude. The Imperial Japanese Navy, confident in the invulnerability of its codes, sailed into a trap designed not by a superior fleet, but by the collective mind of a basement of analysts. And at the core of that effort was a systematic method born not on a battleship, but on a university lecture hall. As the Japanese fleet steamed towards its destiny, the young Yale mathematician and his hardened colleagues awaited the only validation that mattered: the sound of American dive bombers hitting their unsuspecting targets. June 4, 1942, dawned not with silence in the basement of Station Hypo, but with a new kind of tension. The frantic pace of decryption had given way to an agonizing wait. Their work was done. The fleet was engaged. Radio receivers, however, now picked up the real-time chaos of battle, frantic plain text transmissions from American pilots and ships. The analysts, including Gleason, were reduced to being spectators to their own handiwork, interpreting fragmented battle reports against the precise Japanese order of battle they had provided. Then the first reports arrived: massive explosions observed on Japanese carriers. A wave of stunned, disbelieving silence washed over the room, followed by a surge of adrenaline-fueled euphoria that was immediately suppressed. This was not a time for celebration, but for verification. They cross-referenced pilot claims with the known identities and locations of the Japanese carriers from their decrypts. The match was devastatingly accurate. The dive bombers had found Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu exactly where Hypo's intelligence had predicted. The systematic recovery of JN25 traffic had directly orchestrated the most decisive 5 minutes in naval aviation history. In that moment, the abstract world of statistical deviations and indicator patterns collided with the visceral reality of burning flight decks and a turning tide of war. Gleason's method, born from pure mathematical reasoning, had just measured its success in thousands of tons of sinking enemy warships. The victory at Midway was not the end of the work, but the ultimate validation of the new system. In the following days and weeks, as the U.S. Navy absorbed the magnitude of its success, the role of Station Hypo and its Yale method became cemented. Admiral Nimitz sent a classified personal commendation. More importantly, the entire approach to attacking JN-25 was institutionalized and scaled. Gleason's systematic framework for exploiting non-random indicators became a standard procedure taught to new cryptanalysts and integrated with the intuitive brilliance of veterans like Driscoll and Dyer. The triumph was not of one man over a cipher, but of a new collaborative model of cryptanalysis. The ivory tower theorist and the battle-hardened practitioner had fused their strengths. The Japanese, reeling from the defeat but still confident in JN-25, continued to use it. This was their fatal mistake. Hypo, now operating with proven confidence, began reading an ever greater percentage of traffic. The intelligence flow became a torrent, guiding submarine wolf packs to convoys and forewarning of offensives. The twist, felt keenly by Gleason, was a profound shift in his own identity. He had entered the war as a mathematician applying his skill to a military problem. After Midway, he had become a cryptanalyst, his mind forever shaped by the knowledge that an equation could ripple across an ocean and explode on an enemy's flight deck. The triumph at Midway was the proof of concept. The rest of the Pacific War would be its relentless, systematic application.
In the aftermath of Midway, the work at Station Hypo and its sister units transformed. Cryptanalysis was no longer a desperate gamble, it became a sustained industrial process. Gleason's systematic approach was refined, codified, and integrated into the daily workflow. The focus shifted from achieving a single breakthrough to maintaining a continuous intelligence pipeline. Teams now worked like assembly lines. One tracked and predicted changes in the Japanese additive tables. Another mass-produced decryptions of convoy routing orders. A third compiled the decrypted data into actionable fleet intelligence. The war of algorithms had truly begun. U.S. submarines, once blind hunters, now received precise coordinates for Japanese tankers and freighters, their routes laid bare by broken JN-25 messages. The kill ratios in the Pacific inverted dramatically. Where America had once lost 3 ships for every Japanese vessel sunk, it now sank 2 for every one lost. The economic strangulation of Japan commenced not just with torpedoes, but with the prior decryption of shipping schedules. Gleason, now a valued lieutenant, found himself less a lone theorist and more an engineer of a vast cryptographic machine, constantly tweaking and improving the statistical models to stay ahead of Japanese security refinements. The basement was no longer a tomb of despair, but the humming engine room of the Pacific offensive. The ultimate demonstration of this new, relentless capability came in April 1943. Through meticulous analysis of JN-25 traffic, cryptanalysts pinpointed the itinerary of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor. The decrypted message revealed not just his inspection tour of the Solomon Islands, but the exact takeoff and arrival times of his transport aircraft, down to the minute. This intelligence was so precise and sensitive that it went directly to President Roosevelt and Admiral Nimitz. The decision was made. Yamamoto was to be ambushed. On April 18th, long-range P-38 Lightning fighters flying a complex interception calculated to the second met the Admiral's plane exactly as predicted and shot it down. This operation, codenamed Vengeance, was the purest expression of the new warfare, a mathematical prediction resulting in a surgical strike. For Gleason and his colleagues, it was a somber confirmation of their power.
They were no longer just reading the enemy's mail, they were using it to alter the enemy's command structure in real time. The Japanese, bewildered by the uncanny luck of American forces, began to suspect their codes were compromised, but could not prove it or bear the operational cost of changing their entire cryptographic system mid-war. The twist was now complete. The United States was fighting a war of information dominance, and the systematic method, pioneered in part by a young Yale mathematician, had become one of its sharpest swords.
With the war's end, Andrew Gleason faced a choice that symbolized the transition of an era. The newly forming National Security Agency offered him a distinguished career in the shadows, a master cryptanalyst for the Cold War. But the intellectual freedom of pure mathematics called him back. Following an unofficial nod from his former commanders, who understood that such a mind belonged to the world as much to the military, he returned to academia. He entered Harvard not as a student, but as a professor and one of the leading mathematicians of his generation. His wartime work remained sealed under the Official Secrets Act, a ghost chapter in his life. To his students and colleagues, he was the brilliant solver of Hilbert's fifth problem and a pioneer in quantum logic, the very picture of an ivory tower genius. They saw the depth of his theorems, but not the blood and oil-stained crucible in which his analytical discipline had been forged. Gleason himself rarely spoke of it, not out of modesty alone, but because the culture of silence was second nature. The man who helped orchestrate the ambush at Midway and the interception of Yamamoto now pondered abstract spaces and group theory, his most consequential contributions to his country unknown and uncelebrated. The truth began to seep out only decades later with the declassification of World War II cryptologic records in the 1990s. Historians piecing together the story of JN-25 found the fingerprints of a young Yale officer's systematic methods all over the breakthrough. Gleason, by then an elder statesman of mathematics, finally received quiet acknowledgement from the intelligence community. In a rare interview, he deflected credit to the veterans like Rochefort, Dyer, and Driscoll, calling himself merely a catalyst who applied a fresh perspective. The final profound twist lies in the legacy. Andrew Gleason's life became a bridge between two worlds, the secret applied mathematics that wins wars and the open theoretical pursuit that expands human knowledge. He proved that the same rigor of thought could crack an enemy cipher and solve a century-old mathematical enigma. His story is not of a soldier on the front lines, but of a scientist in a basement whose weapons were pattern, logic, and system. A man who helped change the course of a global conflict and then returned to his blackboard, leaving history to eventually discover the invisible thread connecting the Battle of Midway to the halls of Harvard.